On the tidally locked world of Helios 9, one side burns under an unblinking sun, while the other freezes in perpetual darkness. Between these extremes lies the penumbra, home to a corporate black site built to make inconvenient minds disappear. Within the sterile corridors of this facility, Dr. Aris Thorne traced circuits on a salvaged data plate, a meaningless task performed under the unblinking red eye of an automated turret. He was an exotic matter specialist, a mind that once wrestled with the fabric of space-time, now reduced to repetitive, soul-crushing labor. His crime was not theft or violence, but discovery. His unauthorized research had threatened the technological monopoly of his corporate masters, and for this transgression he was condemned not to a sentence, but to a state of non-existence, a forgotten variable in a closed and unforgiving system. From his command center overlooking the silent blocks, Warden Kalen observed his domain on a wall of monitors. He watched Thorne not as a man, but as an asset whose value had depreciated to zero. To Kalen, Helios 9 was not a place of rehabilitation. Such concepts were inefficient and sentimental. It was an accounting tool, a final line item on a balance sheet where problematic individuals were moved from the ledger of the living to the void of the forgotten. His role was not to punish, but to erase, ensuring the corporation's history remained clean and its secrets buried in the permanent twilight of a dead world. The prisoners of Helios 9 were condemned to toil in the planet's perpetual twilight, their forms silhouetted against the stark horizon of the mining quarry. Under the unblinking eyes of automated sentinels, they extracted rare tellurides from the rock, a grueling and thankless task. It was here that Dr. Aris Thorne worked, his movements slow with exhaustion. Beside him, another scientist named Lena drove her own vibrospade into the unforgiving stone. For a brief moment, their eyes met, and in a whispered exchange shielded from the audio sensors, they shared a fragment of solidarity, a reminder of a life defined by intellect rather than labor. As Aris worked a deeper, more isolated vein, his mining tool struck something that produced an unnerving, silent vibration. The facility's geological sensors, designed to detect density and composition, registered nothing, a void where there should have been rock. He carefully cleared the dust and debris, his scientific curiosity piqued. What he uncovered was an impossibility. It was a small, perfectly geometric octahedron, its edges impossibly sharp. The object was fashioned from a material that reflected no light, a patch of pure blackness that seemed to drink the harsh quarry floodlights. It felt neither warm nor cold, its presence a null point in the physical world. The anomaly did not go unnoticed. Guard Captain Valerius, a man whose authority was absolute in the quarry, saw the halt in Thorne's work. He approached, his heavy boots crunching on the gravel. With a gloved hand, he seized the object from the scientist's grasp. Aris began to speak, his voice urgent, attempting to articulate the profound scientific implications of the discovery. Valerius responded not with words, but with the butt of his rifle, a sharp blow that sent Aris to his knees. The message was clear. Discoveries belong to the prison, not the prisoners. In the sterile confines of his office, Warden Kalen examined the confiscated object. He placed it within a high-energy containment field, a shimmering cage for the impossible specimen. He initiated a battery of scans, spectrometry, quantum tunneling microscopy, graviton emission detectors. The results were a cascade of errors and nonsensical data. The artifact did not seem to possess mass in a conventional sense, yet it warped the space around it. Kalen, seeing not a scientific wonder, but a potential instrument of unparalleled power, designated the object the Continuum Locus, his mind already calculating its applications for control and profit. Confined to his cell, the despair that had defined Aris Thorne's existence was replaced by an intellectual fire. The object consumed his thoughts. From memory, he used a shard of stone to sketch its flawless geometry onto the concrete floor. His mind raced, formulating theories on its exotic matter properties, its potential connection to higher dimensions. The fear of his captors and the hopelessness of his situation began to recede, supplanted by a dangerous and singular purpose: to understand the artifact, no matter the cost. Desperation became the catalyst for action. Aris, using his intimate knowledge of the prison's automated systems, triggered a cascade failure in a distant power conduit. The resulting alarm served as the perfect diversion, drawing security patrols away from the administrative spire. In the engineered chaos, He slipped from his block, moving through service corridors like a phantom. He bypassed the warden's preliminary security with practiced ease, his target not escape, but the recovery of the impossible object held within the laboratory. Back within the sterile confines of his cell, Aris Thorne held the Continuum Locus. The object was strangely inert in his hands, cool to the touch and absorbing the meager light of his room. Yet it seemed to thrum with a sub-audible energy that resonated deep in his bones. His examination was cut short by the sudden, piercing wail of an alarm, followed by the automated voice announcing a facility-wide lockdown. The cold reality of his situation settled upon him. He was no longer just a prisoner, but a thief with contraband of unknowable value. The rhythmic stomp of magnetic boots echoed down the corridor, growing louder with each passing second. Heavy-shouldered figures in black armor appeared outside his cell's viewport. Guard Captain Valerius, his face a mask of grim authority, raised a hand and pointed directly at Aris. His squad moved with brutal efficiency, attaching a heavy device to the door's external lock. A high-pitched whine signaled the beginning of the override sequence. Through the viewport, Valerius's voice was inaudible, but his expression was clear. Aris Thorne had mere moments before his world came to an end. Cornered, Aris clutched the locus, his mind retreating from the immediate panic into the cold sanctuary of theoretical physics. He was a specialist in exotic matter, a master of concepts that defied conventional reality. His thoughts raced, not of escape, but of the mechanics of space-time itself. He fixated on a singular, impossible idea: spatial folding, the concept of bending two distant points in the fabric of reality to touch. He did not think of a destination, only of the state of being beyond the immediate obstacle, beyond the armored figures and the sealed door. In his hand, the locus responded. The world seen through the viewport shimmered, the metallic corridor distorting like a reflection in disturbed water. The whining of the override device warped, stretching into a low, guttural groan. The distortion collapsed in an instant, and the oppressive sound ceased. The cell door hissed open, not from an external breach, but with the quiet finality of its normal cycle. Aris found himself standing not inside his cell, but in the corridor beyond it. The override device was gone. The armored squad was gone. Of Guard Captain Valerius, there was no trace. No scorch marks marred the walls, no bodies lay on the floor, no evidence of a struggle remained. There was only the hum of the station's life support, and an absolute, unnerving silence where men had stood seconds before. Driven by a need for empirical data, Aris moved to a nearby security terminal. His hands, steady despite the impossibility of the situation, accessed the system logs. He sought the surveillance footage from the last few minutes, expecting to find a recording of the guard's impossible disappearance. The log was blank for that time index. He then initiated a search for Valerius's personnel file. The system returned an error. No such individual found. He broadened the search to the entire facility roster. The name Valerius did not exist. There was no record that the guard captain had ever been assigned to Helios 9, had ever been employed by the corporation, had ever been born. Leaning against the cold wall of the deserted corridor, Aris stared at the geometric object in his hand. The truth settled upon him, a realization far more profound and terrifying than mere teleportation. The locus had not moved him. It had answered his focused desire by rewriting reality itself. To place him outside the cell, it had unwritten the obstacle. It had not killed the guards. It had erased them from the very continuity of existence. The weight of this discovery was immense. He held the key to his freedom. But the price of turning that key was the unmaking of the universe, one person at a time. Within the metallic guts of a secluded maintenance tunnel, Aris Thorne laid out a stolen schematic upon the grimy floor. The panic of his initial escape had subsided, replaced by the cold precision of a scientist examining a new, terrible variable. He traced a path through the prison's circulatory system, identifying a key security checkpoint as the next impassable obstacle. In the oppressive silence, he rationalized the act to come. The Continuum Locus was not an instrument of murder, but a tool of physics, a necessary key to be wielded against his captors. From a darkened observation post overlooking a major junction, Aris watched his target. The guard below was a notoriously cruel man, an architect of misery within the prison's ecosystem. Aris observed him not with anger, but with the dispassionate focus of an experimenter selecting a specimen. He raised the locus, its non-surface seeming to drink the dim light of the corridor. His mind, a vessel of complex theories and desperate will, focused intently on the guard, and then on the empty space that lay just beyond the checkpoint's barrier. For a brief moment, the air in the junction shimmered, distorting like heat haze over scorched earth. Then, reality settled into a new configuration. Aris Thorne found himself standing on the far side of the checkpoint, the path ahead clear. The guard was gone. More than gone, the entire guard station had been subtly altered. Where a man once stood, an automated sensory turret now whirred softly, its optical lens glowing a placid green. The checkpoint was now, and had apparently always been, a fully automated system, as if a human operator was never part of its original design. He made his way to the prison's central records room. A quick search of the system confirmed the horrifying totality of the event. The erased guard possessed no personnel file, no service record, no existence. As Aris turned to leave, he overheard two remaining guards in a nearby corridor. They spoke of the junction he had just passed, complaining about budget cuts and the new automated systems that had been installed. Their memories, like the digital records, had been rewritten. There was no body, no crime, not even the memory of a man to betray. Hiding in a ventilation shaft high above the prison floor, a profound understanding settled upon Aris. He could move through the facility with absolute impunity, removing any obstacle, human or otherwise. The desperate prisoner was gone, replaced by a methodical phantom. He was no longer a man escaping his cage, but a ghost editing the world around him, one deletion at a time, leaving behind a spreading silence that only he could perceive. Aris Thorne became a phantom moving through the arteries of Helios 9. He was no longer a prisoner, but a force of correction, an editor of a flawed reality. He moved from one strategic point to another with cold purpose. At the central communications hub, the three technicians monitoring the network ceased to exist, their consoles now running on a fully automated, self-correcting protocol. In the main armory, the guards charged with its defense were unwritten from the timeline, leaving advanced weapons secured by systems that no longer required human oversight. The prison's human element dwindled with each silent step he took, its functions collapsing into an eerie, automated efficiency. The growing emptiness manifested as a palpable silence. Aris observed the prison mess hall, a space once loud with the clatter of trays and gruff conversation, now a place of echoing quiet. The few remaining guards and prisoners were jumpy, their paranoia a low hum beneath the surface of the facility's routine. They spoke in whispers of corporate-mandated transfers and sudden budget cuts, fabricating logical reasons for the disappearances. They were stories woven from nothing, desperate attempts by the human mind to patch the holes in a reality that was steadily unraveling around them, a reality they could no longer trust. In the quiet of a deserted workshop, Aris attempted to conjure the face of the first man he had erased, Guard Captain Valerius. He could recall the uniform, the rank, the immediate threat, but the face itself was a blur, a featureless shape, fading like a photograph left too long in the sun. The memory was hazy, indistinct. This was the first indication that the Continuum Locus did not merely edit the world, but also the mind of its wielder, eroding the very history it was used to rewrite. From his command spire, Warden Kalen reviewed the facility's metrics. The data was impossible. Power consumption was down, life support loads had dropped precipitously, yet the system reported full operational capacity with no corresponding personnel transfers. The logs showed massive, inexplicable gaps. While the memories of his subordinates had been rewritten, Kalen's analytical mind detected the pattern in the chaos. The discrepancies were not random errors. They were precise, surgical removals. His logic led to one conclusion. An unknown force was methodically dismantling his prison from within. His attention settled on the file of a single inmate, Dr. Aris Thorne. His path of escape eventually led him toward the prisoner barracks, to the block that held Lena, his only human connection in the facility. From the shadows he observed her cell, flanked by multiple guards. A single, wide-ranging fold could clear his path to the next sector, but the risk was absolute. The artifact was a scalpel of impossible power, but in a crowded room, it was a blunt instrument. The desire for her freedom was now weighed against the possibility of her utter non-existence, a cost that, for the first time, gave him pause. As Aris Thorne moved through a now deserted maintenance corridor, he witnessed a flaw in the weave of the world he was unmaking. For a brief moment, the air in front of him shimmered, distorting like heat haze over asphalt. It was a visual glitch, a residual artifact in the fabric of space where a person had once stood. The narrator might posit that reality itself was becoming strained, that the holes he tore in causality were not being patched seamlessly. Each erasure left a scar, invisible to most, but perceptible to its architect. The path to the Warden's central control spire was now clear, save for one final, unavoidable obstacle. Facility schematics showed the only access route was through the prison's primary medical bay. Inside, under the glare of sterile lights, was Lena, his only human connection, being treated for nutrient deficiencies. She was surrounded by a contingent of 4 guards. Aris analyzed the spatial geometry of the situation with cold dread. There was no way to isolate the guards. He could not fold past them without including the entire room and its occupants within the locus of erasure. The choice was absolute. He stood in the corridor, the Continuum Locus cold in his hand. There was a final moment of hesitation, a pause that was the last remnant of the man he had been. Then he raised the artifact and focused his intent not on the room before him, but on the elevator lobby just beyond its far wall. The world did not shatter. It dissolved. The corridor shimmered and reformed around him. He was standing in the lobby, the medbay door now sealed behind him. A glance through its reinforced window revealed only darkness. The room was now an empty, decommissioned space, its lights off, its equipment gone, as if it had never been in use. In the profound silence that followed, Aris tried to recall the face of the woman from the quarry, the scientist named Lena. But the memory was already fading, the details blurring like a photograph left in the sun. He was left with a profound and hollow sense of loss, yet the source of that feeling was becoming indistinct. He was haunted not by a ghost, but by an absence. It was the palpable weight of nothing. A hole carved directly into his own memory. A wound he could feel but could no longer see. He reached the base of the Warden's command spire and looked up at its imposing height. The expression on his face was no longer that of a scientist, a prisoner, or a victim. It was the blank, inexorable resolve of a force of nature. In that moment, the distinction was made clear. Dr. Aris Thorne was no longer escaping a prison. He was systematically erasing a failed and flawed reality, with its architect waiting at the top. Aris Thorne began the final ascent to the Warden's spire, only to find his path barred by defenses that required no human element. Warden Kalin, in his cold logic, had anticipated this. Automated turrets, calibrated to detect quantum fluctuations, emerged from the walls. Laser grids materialized, their beams hot enough to sublimate metal. The very air seemed hostile, a network of unseen traps. To proceed was not a matter of stealth, but of rewriting the laws of physics moment by moment. Aris was forced to make a series of short, precise folds, bypassing each lethal layer in a disorienting sequence of spatial jumps. He appeared not in a flurry of motion, but with the quiet finality of a resolved equation. Warden Kalin was waiting for him in the panoramic command center, standing behind the faint shimmer of a personal energy shield. Kalin was not alarmed. He was intrigued. He revealed that he understood the nature of Thorne's ability, not as a mystical power, but as a scientific anomaly. By analyzing the impossible energy signatures and the cascading mass energy violations within the prison's closed system, he had deduced the truth. He was not facing a ghost, but a man wielding a tool that unmade the universe one piece at a time. A strange and silent debate commenced between them. Through the sterile air of the command center, Kalin argued that Thorne's actions were no different from the corporate doctrine he served, the simple erasure of inconvenient entities from the official record. A life, a career, a history, all could be redacted. But Aris, holding the locus, understood a more profound distinction. The narrator would have noted that Kalen's corporation erased lives, leaving behind a void to be filled. Aris Thorne, however, was erasing existence itself, a far more fundamental and terrifying act that left not even a void behind. Kalen's shield was a marvel of defensive technology, designed to repel any physical or energetic assault, but it was a fortress built on the assumption that reality was a constant. It could not stop the very fabric of space-time from being rewritten around it. Aris held the Continuum Locus, but his focus was not on a destination. He did not visualize the space behind the Warden. Instead, he concentrated on a state, a single, overriding concept. A reality in which Warden Kalen had never been assigned to Helios 9, had never existed at all. The figure within the shield did not cry out or dissolve. He simply ceased to be. Dr. Aris Thorne stood alone in the command center. Through the panoramic viewport, he looked out over the sprawling, silent facility. He had reached his goal. He had defeated the final obstacle. He was free, but the silence that answered his victory was absolute, a profound and oppressive emptiness that filled every corridor and cell below. He had become the king of a vast and hollow kingdom, the sole inhabitant of a monument to nothing. Aris Thorne achieved his primary objective. The main gate of Helios 9 slid open without command, its mechanisms now part of a system with no master. He walked out, unhindered, into the perpetual twilight of the tidally locked world. He stood upon the barren rock under a sky of frozen stars, the great sun a permanent fixture on the horizon. There was no one to stop him, no one to give chase. There was also nowhere to go. His freedom was absolute and utterly meaningless. He turned and walked back inside, the sole inhabitant of a silent kingdom. His footsteps echoed through the empty barracks, past rows of beds where no one slept. He moved through the mess hall, where tables and benches sat in perfect, unused order. In the workshops, tools rested on sterile surfaces, waiting for hands that no longer existed. The facility was not ruined or abandoned. It was pristine, operational, and perfectly lifeless. It had become a monument not to memory, but to non-existence, and he was its only pilgrim. In the prison's central server room, Aris accessed his own personnel file, seeking some anchor to his identity. The data that appeared on the screen was corrupted in a way that defied simple logic. His history was riddled with gaps, his qualifications inconsistent. The file's summary listed him as a senior exotic matter specialist, but his assignment was to an, quote, automated deep space containment facility. There was no mention of a warden, of guards, or of other prisoners. The record had been rewritten to justify the world he had created, a world where he was the only human element. He saw his reflection in a polished chrome wall panel as he walked a deserted corridor. For a moment, the image seemed to lose cohesion, to flicker at the edges as if it were a faulty projection. The man staring back at him seemed thin, insubstantial. A cold dread, more profound than any fear of capture, settled over him. Aris raised a hand and pressed his fingers to his own cheek, a desperate, tactile need to confirm that he was still solid, that he was still real in a world he had rendered entirely unreal. He returned to his original cell, the point of his journey's inception. The silence within the small room was no longer an absence of sound, but an oppressive, physical presence. In the profound quiet, he began to hear things. A low hum, a faint, high-pitched whine. This was not the onset of madness, but the audible signature of a damaged reality. It was the sound of the universe straining to resolve a paradox, a man who could not exist, standing in a place that was never built. In the silent command center, Dr. Aris Thorne regarded the Continuum Locus. His mind, stripped of emotion and honed by profound isolation, arrived at a final, terrifying hypothesis. The artifact did not merely erase obstacles in the path of the user. It systematically dismantled the user's own causal chain. Each fold was a transaction, trading a piece of another's existence for a fragment of his own history. The faded memories, the corrupted personnel files, were not side effects, but the primary cost. He was left to wonder if he had ever truly been a prisoner, or if he was merely a paradox given form, a ghost conjured by the artifact to facilitate its own impossible existence. He stood before the panoramic window, looking out at the perpetual twilight of Helios 9. His escape was complete, yet meaningless. There was only one journey left to take, one final experiment to conduct. He would initiate one last fold, not to a destination in space, but to a resolution in logic. His objective was no longer freedom, but an answer. He would apply the artifact's function to its source, to observe what happens when the paradox at the center of a flawed reality attempts to erase itself from the equation of existence. Aris Thorne raised the Continuum Locus one last time. His focus was not on a place, a person, or an object. He concentrated on a single, absolute concept, his own non-existence. He poured the totality of his will into the idea of a universe in which he had never been. There was no shimmer of distorted light, no ripple in the fabric of space. The world did not dissolve and reform. Instead, in the sterile silence of the command spire, the man known as Aris Thorne simply and completely stopped being. An omniscient quiet settled over Helios 9. The facility was a monument to perfect automation. Automated turrets patrolled empty corridors. Robotic arms maintained silent machinery in spotless workshops. The central server hummed, its records pristine, detailing the operations of a containment facility with no prisoners, no guards, and no warden. In the command center, resting on the cold metallic floor, the Continuum Locus lay inert. It was no longer a key or a weapon. It was merely a strange, geometric rock of impossible material, sitting in an empty room at the heart of a perfect, pointless machine. Years later, a corporate survey ship on a routine sweep of the sector passed Helios 9. Its long-range scans reported a fully functional, fully automated deep space facility of unknown purpose. All systems were nominal, but the final report flagged a single, persistent anomaly. In the command spire sat an object of indeterminate mass and energy that violated known physical laws. An object with no discernible origin, inside a facility that was never built by anyone, to hold no one.